On August 19, 1944, at the German Army headquarters in East Prussia, General Alfred Jodl reviewed the latest intelligence from the Western Front. Reports showed that the Allied forces were advancing quickly, but had stretched their supply lines more than 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to General Patton's leading units. German analysts believed this pace couldn't last. They were sure Patton's army would soon run out of fuel and be forced to stop. From his post at Hitler's Wolf's Lair, Jodl calculated what every experienced German officer already knew. A tank division on the move burned through roughly 150,000 gallons of fuel every day. With Patton's forces now hundreds of miles from their supply bases, it seemed impossible to keep them moving. The Germans expected the Americans to stall soon, giving them a chance to regroup along the Seine River and possibly hold out until winter. What Jodl didn't know was that a massive American supply operation was already underway. Around 6,000 trucks were rolling east in a non-stop convoy, headlights on despite the danger, hauling over 12,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and equipment every day. This was the Red Ball Express, an operation so daring and fast that no German planner had imagined could work. Within 3 days, Patton's army, which the Germans believed was stuck, would smash through their positions on the Seine. A week later, they would free Paris. And within a month, they would be at the German border. Germany's top strategists were about to learn a hard lesson, that American logistics, powered by more than 23,000 truck drivers, 3/4 of them African American, could overcome any challenge. This one-way highway system became the most efficient military supply chain ever built. The German confidence in an American breakdown came from their own experience. They had invented blitzkrieg warfare and understood the limits of supply. In Russia, their own offensives had often failed not because of Soviet resistance, but because they couldn't get supplies across such vast distances. Trucks failed on rough roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still the backbone of their transport, couldn't keep up with fast-moving tanks. Railroads used a different track width, leaving mountains of supplies stranded far from the front lines. In July 1944, German General Heinrich von Lutwitz wrote that the Americans were facing the same fate. He believed their advantage in machinery would turn into a weakness. Tanks and vehicles needed fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, and they had moved 400 miles in just a month. To him, the outcome was clear. They would soon stop moving. German intelligence tracked U.S. supply needs carefully. A single Sherman tank burned about half a mile per gallon, and far worse on rough ground. An infantry division needed 700 tons of supplies a day. An armored division needed 1,000. Patton commanded 12 divisions over a 60-mile front. By German math, that meant 12,000 tons a day, all carried over destroyed roads, hundreds of miles from the coast. Major General Siegfried Westphal, soon to serve as Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, made his own calculations on August 20th. He concluded that even if the Americans had endless trucks and perfect roads, which they didn't, they still couldn't maintain such an advance for more than 2 days. To him, the laws of physics made it impossible. Yet, just 5 days later, on August 25, 1944, in a French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Reniers of the U.S. Motor Transport Service met with a group of officers. They all faced the same brutal math. Patton's army was burning through supplies faster than any force in history. It was moving so fast that the traditional systems, rail transport, planned convoys, and depot distribution, had all collapsed. The only option left was to create something entirely new. Lieutenant Colonel Ayres looked across the room and made his announcement. "Gentlemen, here's what we're going to do," he said firmly. "We'll build a one-way highway system stretching from Cherbourg and the beaches all the way to the front lines. Every truck will run 20 hours a day, only stopping for fuel or emergencies. Our goal is to move at least 12,500 tons of supplies every single day." The plan took its name from an old railroad term. A red ball shipment meant express delivery. Nothing could delay it. The same rule would now apply here. Total priority, no waiting, no exceptions. The setup went against every principle in German military planning. 2 one-way highways would be used. One for loaded trucks heading to front, the other for empty ones returning. The convoys would run non-stop. with headlights blazing through the night, ignoring blackout rules. Trucks had to keep moving. No halts except for refueling or repairs. They traveled in 5-minute intervals, averaging 35 miles per hour. Mobile repair units were stationed every 50 miles, and military police checkpoints pulled out any vehicle that dropped below 25 miles per hour. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, head of the advanced section of the communications zone, reviewed the math and shook his head. The plan required 140 truck companies and nearly 6,000 vehicles, all working at 90% capacity. On paper, it looked impossible. But within 36 hours, the impossible became reality. On August 26, 1944, drivers from a 3,916 quartermaster truck company climbed into their GMC CCW deuce-and-a-half trucks, loaded with 105mm artillery shells for Patton's troops fighting 300 miles east near Melun. What followed would have shocked Nazi racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers who ran the Red Ball Express, about 75% were African-American soldiers serving in a segregated U.S. Army. Despite facing discrimination back home, barred from white restaurants and restrooms, these men kept Patton's army moving forward. They quickly developed their own identity on the road. Many painted bold slogans on their trucks. Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, and Asterisk, Detroit to Berlin Express. Asterisk, they made their own traffic rules. Slower trucks had to pull over immediately. Broken down vehicles were pushed aside, and anything crawling under 20 miles per hour was treated as a roadblock. By August 28th, German reconnaissance units began spotting the convoys and couldn't believe what they saw. Reports described endless lines of trucks with headlights on, stretching for miles, about 20 kilometers of constant movement. Over 1,000 vehicles were passing each hour. To German observers, the Americans had lost their minds. Running headlights at night broke every rule of war. Continuous traffic without gaps meant a single hit could block the road for hours. Yet the Americans kept coming. General Edgar Feutinger of the 21st Panzer Division watched the Red Ball express himself on August 30th from a hidden position. His report to headquarters was filled with disbelief. The enemy supply operation defies understanding. Vehicles pass every 30 seconds, day and night. They do not hide. They do not disperse. They follow no doctrine we recognize. This is not traditional warfare. This is industrial production applied to combat. The Germans couldn't grasp it because American logistics ran on an entirely different mindset. While German strategy valued secrecy and precision, the Americans relied on scale and adaptability. The Germans tried to preserve every truck. The Americans planned for 20% breakdowns and kept rolling anyway. Where Germany followed strict procedures, America improvised constantly. The results were staggering. In the first week alone, from August 25th to 31st, 1944, the Red Ball Express delivered nearly 90,000 tons of supplies. That averaged over 12,800 tons per day, across a round-trip distance of 686 miles. Nearly 6,000 trucks made about 1.5 runs daily, burning 300,000 gallons of fuel in the process. When German intelligence captured these figures from American reports, they refused to believe them. They dismissed the numbers as pure propaganda. Because by their own calculations, such an operation was simply impossible. But the numbers weren't exaggerated. They were real, and they were climbing fast. By September 5th, 1944, the Red Ball Express had reached a level of efficiency that stunned German officers, who still depended on horse-drawn wagons for most of their supply transport. Convoys rolled out every 5 minutes from the western depots, each averaging 67 trucks. Every vehicle carried around 5 tons of cargo, often overloaded to 7. Covering the 350-mile route took about 14 hours one way, with just a 2-hour turnaround before heading back. At any given moment, more than 5,000 trucks were moving somewhere along the route. The system kept evolving as drivers and mechanics found creative fixes to problems that German experts believed unsolvable. Roughly 1,800 trucks broke down every day, but mobile repair units worked right on the roadside. Mechanics developed a fast triage process. If a truck couldn't be repaired in 15 minutes, it was pushed aside. Parts were stripped from vehicles that couldn't be saved, and engines were swapped out in under an hour using mobile cranes. When traffic piled up on the main route, drivers simply created alternate paths. They took over French buses to move troops and free up trucks for hauling supplies. Abandoned German vehicles were repainted olive green and put back to work. When bridges were destroyed, they built makeshift bypasses using rubble from bombed towns. To German observers, this looked like chaos, but it worked. Their doctrine demanded strict organization, scheduled maintenance, and detailed plans. The Americans ignored all of it, yet their system became faster and more efficient with every passing day. What truly shocked German intelligence was how the Americans managed fuel. The Red Ball Express alone burned through about 300,000 gallons of gasoline each day, more than many entire German armies received. And still, the Americans never ran out. Behind this miracle was another operation. Pluto, pipelines under the ocean. Hidden beneath the English Channel, these underwater fuel lines pumped gasoline directly from Britain to France. By September, fuel was flowing steadily through these secret pipelines, completely undetected by German intelligence. Along the Red Ball route, fuel depots were set up every 25 miles, and tanker trucks formed their own supply convoys to keep every vehicle topped off. No truck waited more than 10 minutes to refuel. From the air, German General Walter Wehrmacht studied reconnaissance photos and was stunned. The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire national reserves, he noted. They burn more gasoline delivering fuel than we give to entire tank divisions. This isn't war. It's industrial overflow. The Red Ball Express didn't just keep Patton's army supplied. It supercharged his advance. German doctrine held that armored forces could move 20 to 30 miles per day at best. But with the Red Ball support, Patton's divisions were advancing 40 to 60 miles daily and sustaining that pace for weeks. On September 1st, 1944, the U.S. 4th Armored Division covered 35 miles in the morning, paused briefly to refuel and rearm from waiting Red Ball trucks, and then pushed another 32 miles in the afternoon. A total of 67 miles in one day. This single-day leap destroyed every German assumption about how far mechanized forces could travel. In East Prussia, General Heinz Guderian reviewed the reports and dismissed them at first. No armored force can move 60 miles a day for a week, he insisted. Mechanical limits make that impossible. But intercepted American radio transmissions confirmed it, and even more shocking, U.S. forces weren't using codes. They were openly broadcasting their positions, confident they could outpace any German response. By September 5th, 1944, German intelligence had assembled a full report on the Red Ball Express. Its findings were devastating. Every principle of German military planning had been proven wrong. The report's conclusion was blunt. The Americans had redefined the very science of modern warfare. The Americans burned through trucks at a pace that shocked German observers. Damaged vehicles were often left behind rather than repaired, and drivers pushed themselves for days on little rest, sometimes staying awake with stimulants. To the Germans, it looked reckless. No camouflage, bright headlights, open roads, and a mechanical failure rate of nearly 30% daily. Yet the sheer volume of trucks kept the system running. Fuel consumption alone would have bankrupted any European army. Field Marshal Walter Model's reaction summed up the growing despair. If these reports are true, he said, we face not just a stronger army, but a stronger civilization. They don't hide because they don't fear us. They waste resources because they have endless resources. This isn't a war we can win with tactics. Behind the numbers was a human cost. Many drivers worked 72-hour stretches without proper rest, often hallucinating from exhaustion or medication. Around 300 men died during the operation. Lost to crashes and fog, overturned trucks, or fires from overheated engines. Yet their spirits stayed high. Most were African-American soldiers who, despite segregation and discrimination back home, knew they were proving something larger. Every mile they drove and every load they delivered stood as living proof that Hitler's racist theories were wrong. Captured German officers later admitted how deeply the Red Ball Express had shaken their faith. General Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told his interrogators, "We knew we were finished once we understood your supply system. You broke every rule, wasted fuel, abandoned vehicles, pushed drivers to the limit, and still succeeded through sheer scale. You've turned war into industrial output. The psychological effect was enormous. German troops could hear the hum of U.S. engines through the night. Endless trucks, endless supplies. While they rationed 3 bullets per rifle, the Americans moved millions of rounds every day. That constant rumble became a form of psychological warfare all its own. Even the vehicles impressed the Germans. The GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck, the Deuce and a Half, became the backbone of the Red Ball Express. By war's end, General Motors had built over 500,000 of them, more than all the trucks in the German army combined. These vehicles came with features the Wehrmacht had never managed to produce at scale. Standard all-wheel drive, automatic tire inflation, waterproofing that allowed deep river crossings, reliable heaters, and engines that ran on low-grade fuel without issue. American maintenance philosophy stunned the Germans even more. Where they rebuilt every engine carefully, the Americans simply swapped in new ones. Where Germans rationed spare parts, the U.S. forces replaced entire vehicles for minor issues. They didn't rely on a handful of experts. They trained thousands of capable mechanics who could fix 80% of problems on the spot. As the battlefront pushed eastward, the Red Ball Express evolved with lightning speed. When the original route to Chartres became too limited, U.S. forces built new extensions almost overnight. The White Ball Express from Rouen to Paris, Green Diamond from Cherbourg to rail depots, Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels, and the ABC route linking Antwerp, Brussels, and Charleroi. Each new line went from planning to full operation in under 2 days, while German staff would have taken weeks to approve such changes. The sight of mostly African-American drivers running this enormous system created a direct challenge to Nazi ideology. German propaganda had portrayed black soldiers as incapable of discipline or technical skill. Yet these men were managing one of the most complex logistics operations in military history. They knew what the Nazis believed, and that knowledge fueled their determination. Every mile they drove disproved Hitler's lies. Some captured German soldiers were forced to work loading Red Ball trucks. They were stunned to see African-American sergeants running the operation, calculating load weights faster than German engineers, speaking fluent English, and treating prisoners with fairness and respect. For many of them, it shattered a lifetime of propaganda. In the wreckage of war, they saw the truth. The very men their ideology called inferior were the ones powering the army that defeated them. The Red Ball Express demanded an infrastructure so vast that German engineers had dismissed it as impossible under battlefield conditions. Yet American forces built it anyway, right in the middle of a war. Within weeks, they had reinforced 40 bridges, established 15 major fuel depots, set up 26 repair stations, and even constructed 8 temporary cities to house drivers, all while convoys continued to roll day and night. One key bridge at Monty, destroyed by retreating German troops to block Allied supply routes, was expected to take at least 6 weeks to rebuild. American engineers finished a functional replacement in just 14 hours. Convoys were only briefly rerouted, detouring a few miles along bulldozed dirt paths, before the supply line was fully restored. German officers who observed these feats were stunned. They saw no lengthy planning meetings, no blueprints, no delays. American engineers simply acted, clearing rubble, throwing up structures, and building faster than the Germans could destroy. Roads, bridges, and depots seemed to appear overnight. What truly astonished German artillery officers was the Americans' ammunition supply. Their delivery rates shattered every German calculation of what was possible. U.S. artillery units fired freely, unrestricted by rationing. During the siege of Metz in September 1944, American guns from XX Corps unleashed over 100,000 shells in a single day, and the Red Ball Express delivered not only that amount but an extra 20% reserve. Meanwhile, German forces defending Metz were limited to about 50 shells per gun per day. The imbalance was overwhelming. American cannons roared for hours without pause, sustained by supply convoys that delivered roughly 50 truckloads of ammunition every hour. German commanders couldn't comprehend how such a tempo was even achievable. Of course, this relentless pace came at a cost. By late September, vehicle wear had reached extreme levels. The average Red Ball truck lasted just 10,000 miles, barely a third of its normal lifespan. Roughly 30% of the fleet was sidelined daily for maintenance. Mechanics replaced 500 engines each week and went through 10,000 tires. More than 5,000 trucks were destroyed or abandoned altogether. Yet the convoys never stopped. American industry had planned for this level of loss. New trucks arrived constantly from French ports, fresh from U.S. factories. Replacement drivers were trained in as little as 2 days and immediately sent onto the roads. German intelligence estimated that the Americans were losing more trucks every week than the Wehrmacht had in all of France, yet their supply capacity kept growing. The United States had achieved something unheard of in German doctrine, a logistics system faster than its own rate of consumption. For French civilians along the route, the sight of endless convoys was nothing short of revelation. After years of German occupation and scarcity, they suddenly saw an army with limitless supplies. Red Ball drivers, many of them African American, often shared food and essentials despite strict regulations. At every stop, children would gather near the trucks, and drivers would hand out candy, cigarettes, and soap. The difference from German rule was unmistakable. What had been rationed under occupation, the Americans gave away without hesitation. German intelligence even noted the effect. Asterisk, civilians now consider American victory inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Asterisk resistance activity along the routes surged by 400%. Towns that once cooperated with German forces now openly defied them. By early September 1944, however, the Red Ball Express reached its breaking point. Patton's army had raced so far ahead that supply runs were now over 700 miles round trip. Drivers were collapsing from fatigue, and trucks were wearing out faster than they could be repaired. German analysts noticed a slowdown. On September 8th, a Panzer Corps report concluded, American supply lines are faltering. Convoy intervals have widened from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has dropped. This is our chance. But once again, American adaptability changed everything. Within 3 days, the Red Ball Express reorganized completely. They added mid-route transfer depots to shorten runs, rotated drivers to prevent exhaustion, built forward maintenance hubs close to the front, and doubled the total number of trucks in service. By September 12th, instead of collapsing, the system had actually increased its daily tonnage. What the Germans thought was the beginning of a breakdown turned out to be the moment the Americans perfected one of the most remarkable logistics operations in modern warfare. The crisis that should have stopped Patton's advance only pushed the system to evolve. Instead of breaking down, the Americans made it stronger. Alongside the Red Ball Express, they introduced another innovation the Germans had declared impossible: large-scale aerial resupply. See, 47 transport planes began flying non-stop missions, dropping critical fuel, ammunition, and food directly to frontline units. Each aircraft carried around 3 tons of supplies. On September 16, 1944, German observers counted nearly 900 U.S. transport flights in a single day, a staggering 2,700 tons delivered by air. For comparison, the Luftwaffe had managed only about 300 tons daily at height during the Stalingrad campaign, and that was considered a maximum effort. The Americans treated aircraft the same way they treated trucks, tools to be used aggressively. They didn't worry about escorts or fuel limits. They simply accepted potential losses and compensated through sheer numbers. Germany could not match this level of industrial power. The Red Ball Express also ran under command methods that defied German tradition. In the U.S. system, junior officers made real-time decisions that, in the Wehrmacht, only generals were allowed to make. Sergeants often managed operations larger than what German colonels oversaw. To the Germans, it looked like chaos. No central command, no rigid chain of approval. But somehow, this freedom produced speed and efficiency beyond anything the Wehrmacht could achieve through strict hierarchy. By October 1944, railroads began catching up to the front lines, gradually reducing the Red Ball's workload. What was originally planned as a 10-day emergency operation had lasted 82 days. In that time, the Red Ball Express had delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies. covering more than 120 million ton miles. As the Germans fought desperately along their own borders, they came to a sobering realization. Field Marshal Walter Model summed it up in his final report. We were not defeated primarily by American tanks or planes. We were defeated by American trucks. The transition to rail transport was another logistical triumph. While the Red Ball kept the front supplied, U.S. Army engineers rebuilt more than 1,000 miles of destroyed French railways, often laying new track faster than the Germans could demolish it. They even used captured German locomotives and cars to restore service. The final Red Ball Express numbers stunned captured German officers. In just 82 days, the operation had Asterisk delivered 412, 193 tons of supplies. Asterisk covered 222 million ton miles. Asterisk operated an average of 5 958 trucks, peaking at 7,000. Asterisk employed 23,000 drivers. Asterisk burned 700,000 gallons of fuel daily. Asterisk moved 40,000 tons of ammunition, 15 million rations, and 135,000 tons of medical supplies. German staff later admitted their estimates had been far too conservative. They had assumed American capability was roughly 3 times better than Europe's best, but it turned out to be 10 times greater. More than the statistics, though, the Red Ball Express shattered German belief in their own superiority. Wehrmacht officers who had once mocked Americans as soft now watched them perform feats of organization and endurance that no European army could match. In prisoner camps, captured Germans stood silently at fences, watching convoys of Red Ball trucks rumble past. Some broke down in tears. They realized that America's strength wasn't just in battle. It was in the ability to outproduce, outmove, and outlast their enemies. The Americans could afford to waste more than Germany could ever make. And within the U.S. Army itself, the Red Ball Express exposed a different kind of truth, a moral one. Its success had depended largely on African-American soldiers, men who were still segregated, denied equal rights, and barred from combat roles. When General Dwight D. Eisenhower visited the Red Ball operations in September 1944, he saw the contradiction with his own eyes. The very soldiers America kept apart were the ones keeping its greatest army moving forward. Eisenhower's aide, Captain Harry Butcher, later recalled a powerful moment from the general's visit to the Red Ball Express. The general stood watching black drivers who had been working nearly 20 hours straight. Butcher wrote, he said, "These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to rethink many things." That observation captured what the operation had revealed, the undeniable contribution of African-American soldiers. Their performance in France created growing pressure to end segregation within the U.S. military. 3 years later, the armed forces would be officially integrated, but the proof had already been made on the roads of France. Given equal tools and opportunity, these men had shown they could match anyone. The Red Ball Express had been their battlefield, and they had won their fight. German racial theorists could not explain this contradiction. Publications from SS Race Science Institutes quietly stopped mentioning American logistics. The evidence was too strong to deny and too damaging to acknowledge. After the war, German military engineers studied the Red Ball Express in detail, recognizing that it had redefined modern logistics. The lessons were revolutionary. Volume beats precision. Redundancy prevents collapse. Decentralized command creates speed. Standardization multiplies power, and human endurance exceeds old assumptions. Former German Army Chief Franz Halder wrote in 1950, "The Red Ball Express proved that logistics determined strategy, not the other way around." The Americans understood this truth. We learned it too late. Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers were countless acts of bravery that stunned German analysts. These stories came directly from U.S. military records. Corporal John L. Houston drove for 48 continuous hours to deliver ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division near Cambrai, falling asleep at the wheel multiple times, but continuing after being shaken awake by fellow drivers. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire while carrying medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a field hospital, leaping out just before the flames reached the cab. Those supplies went on to save wounded soldiers, American and German alike. Stories like these revealed something the Germans couldn't grasp: a culture built on initiative, risk-taking, and commitment to the mission over strict adherence to rules. Desperate to imitate this success, German commanders tried to form their own version of the Red Ball Express late in 1944. During the Battle of the Bulge, Operation Greif included plans to use captured American trucks for supply runs. The experiment collapsed almost immediately. German drivers couldn't handle the speeds, mechanics couldn't maintain the vehicles, and fuel shortages made the effort impossible. One commander admitted, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were out of action. The Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them." That difference explains our defeat. The harsh winter of 1944 to 45 became the final test. Freezing rain, snow, and ice made most German transport unusable. Their manuals declared wheeled logistics impossible below -10 degrees Celsius. But the Red Ball Express kept moving. Drivers chained tires, poured alcohol into radiators, and pressed forward through blizzards that had halted entire panzer divisions. Speeds dropped, but deliveries continued. German observers reported seeing endless convoys crawling across ice-covered roads when their own armies could not move. The American system wasn't elegant or fuel-efficient by German standards, but it was relentless. It worked in any weather, on any terrain, under any pressure. After the war ended in May 1945, captured German logistics officers were ordered to study Red Ball operations. Their conclusions were unanimous and humbling. General Friedrich Schultz wrote, "The Red Ball Express represents a form of warfare we never conceived. The Americans built a temporary civilization, thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies, that existed only to feed armies, then vanished when its job was done. We spent years building permanent systems. They built better ones in days." The most striking reflection came from General Heinz Uderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg. "We invented the lightning war," he admitted, "but we never solved its greatest weakness, supply. The Americans had. The Americans solved a problem the Germans never could, not through precision or restraint, but through sheer industrial power. The Red Ball Express wasn't just a supply line. It was a river of steel, fuel, and determination that overwhelmed everything in its path." The operation cost the United States around $100 million in 1944, covering destroyed vehicles, burned fuel, damaged roads, and compensation for French infrastructure losses. To German officers, raised in a system built on scarcity, that number was unthinkable. But to the Americans, it was a bargain. The Red Ball Express helped capture 400,000 German soldiers, liberated France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by at least 6 months. Considering that every extra day of war cost the U.S. about $250 million, the Red Ball paid for itself many times over. Within a single day of reduced combat, Lieutenant General John C.H. Lee, who oversaw logistics for the European theater, later summarized it plainly: "We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any other war, that would be catastrophic. In an industrial war, it's just part of the cost." One of the operation's most lasting legacies came after the war. Thousands of Red Ball veterans returned home with unmatched experience in large-scale transport and supply. These drivers became the backbone of America's post-war trucking revolution. They founded companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways, applying the lessons they learned in France. That volume beats precision, speed beats perfection. And if you keep the wheels turning, you can move anything. Their influence shaped the modern U.S. logistics and interstate highway system. Historians now view the Red Ball Express as the single most decisive logistics operation in the European campaign. Without it, Patton's army would have stalled, Paris would have fallen later, and the Germans might have solidified a winter defense line. The Red Ball proved that logistics is not support. It is strategy itself. While German officers studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuver, Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and rail schedules. Their victory came not from abstract theory, but from practical efficiency and relentless production. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that in modern war, supply, not tactics, determines who wins. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Germany's supreme commander in the West, received full intelligence on the Red Ball Express. After hours of review, he turned to his staff and admitted, "Gentlemen, we face something beyond a military solution. The Americans have built a supply system that erases distance. Our entire strategy depends on their advance outrunning their supplies. That moment will never come. They have reinvented war, and we are still fighting the old one." When one of his officers suggested attacking the convoy from the air, Rundstedt simply asked, "With what?" He explained, "They have 6,000 trucks. Even if we could destroy 1,000, which we cannot, they'd replace them in a week. To keep up, we need to destroy 200 trucks every day. We don't even have 200 planes." Behind those vast statistics were thousands of small human stories that revealed something deeper about the Americans. Drivers who hadn't slept for 3 days refused to stop because they feared their replacements wouldn't know the road. Mechanics worked through freezing rain to keep convoys moving. Some drivers were barely out of their teens, having lied about their age just to serve. These moments spread among German ranks and took on a near-mythic quality. The Americans weren't soft or careless. They were relentless. They pushed themselves harder than the Germans drove their horses, and they did it by choice, not compulsion. That made them far more dangerous than any German doctrine had imagined. The Red Ball Express became an unplanned weapon of morale and intimidation. German troops lying in their trenches could hear the steady rumble of engines through the night. Convoys that never stopped, carrying supplies that never ran out. The sound alone became a kind of psychological warfare. Soon, even when no trucks were nearby, German soldiers swore they could still hear them. Phantom convoys, echoing endlessly through the dark, reminding them that America's war machine never slept. The realization that the Americans had endless supplies while German troops rationed their last bullets broke morale across the front. Soldiers began to feel that resistance was pointless. Recognizing this effect, U.S. psychological warfare units amplified it, literally. They broadcasted recordings of truck engines toward German lines, even when no convoys were present. The rumble of those phantom trucks convinced some German units that fresh reinforcements were always on the way. The Red Ball Express had not only fed Patton's army, it had invaded the German mind. By November 1944, with major rail lines restored, the Red Ball Express officially ended, yet its legacy had only begun. The idea of a continuous high-volume, wasteful, but overwhelmingly effective supply system became the cornerstone of American military doctrine. Its final act was as remarkable as its beginning. Within 72 hours, the massive network, 23,000 men, 6,000 trucks, dozens of depots, bridges, and routes, was dismantled. The troops were reassigned, vehicles redistributed, and roads returned to civilian use. The Germans, who took months to organize smaller efforts and years to unwind them, were stunned. The Americans built what they needed, used it completely, discarded it, and then built something even better. When the war finally ended in May 1945, many captured German generals openly cited the Red Ball Express as proof that further resistance was futile. General Otto von Manschenfeld admitted under interrogation, "Once we understood your logistics, we knew it was over. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon we could not counter." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of Germany's most respected commanders, was asked what surprised him most about the Americans. His answer was simple: "Not your tanks, not your planes, your trucks. The Red Ball Express showed us that you had turned your entire nation into a military machine. We were fighting your factories, not your soldiers." The final statistics of the Red Ball Express told the full story of what industrial warfare looked like. Asterisk 412, 193 tons of supplies delivered. Asterisk 122 million ton miles covered. Asterisk 5, 958 trucks operating daily. Peaking at 7,000. Asterisk 23, 000 drivers employed. Asterisk 82 days of operation. Asterisk 57 million gallons of fuel consumed. Asterisk 180, 000 tires worn out. Asterisk 5, 000 plus vehicles lost. Asterisk $100 million total cost. Asterisk 47 German divisions defeated through sustained supply. Asterisk 180 days, roughly 6 months. Cut from the war. These numbers didn't just describe a mission. They marked a turning point in history. The Red Ball Express proved that wars would no longer be won solely by generals and tactics, but by factories, logistics, and the power to keep armies moving. From that point forward, strategy would serve logistics, not the other way around. Half a century later, in 1994, the U.S. Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express as ceremony. In Washington, D.C., veterans gathered to remember the operation that had been overshadowed by famous battles but was just as decisive in victory. They spoke with pride, especially the African-American drivers who had endured long hours, dangerous roads, and little recognition. They had faced exhaustion, breakdowns, and icy storms, yet never stopped. Though segregated and discriminated against, they delivered victory, mile by mile, at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved that logistics wasn't just support, it was the main fight. It demonstrated that a free, industrial democracy could outproduce and outlast a totalitarian state that prided itself on efficiency. German officers who once mocked American excess were forced into silence by 6,000 trucks hauling 12,500 tons of supplies daily across 700 miles of liberated France. They had expected the Americans to act cautiously, to conserve, to move slowly. Instead, the United States unleashed a logistical flood, a tsunami of trucks, fuel, and willpower that buried the German war machine. The triumph of the Red Ball Express wasn't born from theory or genius. It came from something deeper, the American spirit of action, improvisation, and relentless drive, qualities the Germans never understood until it was far too late. The Red Ball Express succeeded not through elegance or tradition, but through industrial power, mechanical skill, improvisation, and the freedom of individual soldiers who made quick, independent decisions, choices that in the German army would have required a field marshal's approval. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army depended entirely on this operation, gave the ultimate tribute in his memoirs. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserve as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through breakdowns, through weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army wouldn't move. Without movement, we wouldn't win. Most were black soldiers, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition, but they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History must remember this truth. That truth remains a lasting legacy of the Red Ball Express. 23,000 mostly African-American drivers, operating 6,000 trucks along a one-way road to victory. They achieved what German science had deemed impossible: supply an advancing army faster than physics should allow. They kept momentum alive beyond normal endurance, proving that in modern warfare, the side with more trucks beats the side with better tactics. The same German generals who once mocked American logistics as wasteful and chaotic surrendered just 82 days later the forces those trucks had sustained. In the end, they realized it wasn't American tanks or aircraft that had broken them. It was the unrelenting flow of supplies. The Red Ball Express turned industrial abundance into a weapon and logistics into strategy. Though the convoys officially ended on November 16, 1944, their influence echoed through history. The operation proved that in the industrial age, victory belongs not to the boldest commander or the bravest soldier, but to the nation that can deliver supplies farthest, fastest, and without pause. Those who laughed at American inefficiency in August 1944 were signing surrender papers by May 1945, defeated by truck drivers averaging 35 miles per hour. Their story stands among the great campaigns of history, not for grace or beauty, but because it worked. The Red Ball Express kept Patton's army moving, kept the Germans retreating, and redefined modern war. In the end, it wasn't the armored column that mattered most. It was the endless line of trucks that made that armor move. Across France, traces of the operation still remain: rutted roads, repaired bridges, and the rusting shells of abandoned vehicles. But its true monument is invisible: the speed of Allied victory. Every day the Red Ball shaved off the war saved thousands of lives. It shortened the conflict by months and turned logistics into the true engine of triumph. The old saying proved prophetic: amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, and Americans talk trucks. The Red Ball Express was America talking loudly through the roar of 6,000 engines thundering day and night across liberated France, carrying freedom, firepower, and faith in victory down a one-way road to history. At the 1994 anniversary ceremony, one veteran recalled a captured German officer standing on a Belgian roadside in 1944, watching the endless convoys pass. The officer turned to his captors and said quietly, "We prepared for your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rolled by every 5 minutes, driven by exhausted Americans rewriting the rules of war, one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express transformed supply into victory, logistics into strategy, and ordinary trucks into the most decisive weapon of the European war. The Germans stopped laughing when they finally understood. But by then, Patton's army was already at their gates, fueled by the unstoppable force of 6,000 engines and 23,000 men who proved that logistics wins wars.